Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight's stories beg the question, is there more to this world than we truly know and understand? Can spirits hold on to this world, protect us, or even try to defile us? What you believe is ultimately up to you, but for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I did special effects makeup for films in my early 20s. A few major ones, but mostly small independent films. When I was 22, I was asked to do some special effects work for a smaller film, on location, at Waverly Hills Sanatorium. I was pretty excited to say the least. I had seen a few movies and paranormal TV shows about Waverly Hills, and I was fascinated by the monstrous building and its somewhat dark history. I arrived in Louisville and was introduced to several of the crew. I became friendly with a lighting guy. We will call him Kyle. Once we arrived at the location, I was taken aback by the sheer size of the building. It was menacing as it loomed against the grey Kentucky sky. We took a tour of most of the building, and I couldn't help but feel I was being watched as we wandered through the decaying halls. The first week went by quickly. I think I was probably too focused on work to notice anything creepy happening around me. I did, however, notice that I felt uneasy. It's hard to describe, really. Most of the time when I was working on location, I would easily become accustomed to the layout of wherever I was and felt at home. This was not the case now. I would become lost. I felt cold constantly, no matter how hot it was outside, and I couldn't shake the feeling there was something staring at me from the shadowy corners of the rooms. It became more and more oppressive, until one day it culminated in one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. We had finished filming on the 3rd floor, and everyone decided we would regroup on the 1st floor before moving on. I'd stayed behind to pack up my stuff, and Kyle was going to come up and help me. I was alone at the end of a long hallway, with rooms lining either side. The doors to the rooms had been long removed, so the hallway was very well lit. It was also 10 a.m. I remember suddenly feeling a chill shoot through my spine and all my hair standing on end. I stopped what I was doing and looked up. Standing, more like hovering, about 10 feet away from me, was a humanoid-shaped black mass. I froze and stared at it. I felt nothing but pure malevolence from this thing. I felt like it wanted to hurt me. Just then, Kyle came up the stairs. "Jules, let's..." He stopped dead in his tracks. I didn't dare look away from this thing, for fear it would come after me, and I knew Kyle was staring at it too. "You see it too, right?" I whispered. My heart was pounding in my chest. I slowly stood up and moved closer to Kyle. As I did, the figure moved closer. "Okay, when I say go, just run. Leave your stuff here. We'll come back for it later," Kyle said, pushing me back slowly. I nodded as the figure inched closer. All of a sudden, what would have been the neck snapped to the side, and the arms twitched unnaturally. I heard Kyle gasp, "Go, go." Kyle and I took off down the hallway. As we ran, we could hear loud footsteps behind us. They were so loud, they echoed throughout the entire building. Once we reached the stairs, I hit the first step and jumped the rest of the way. The minute my feet hit the 1st floor, there was a loud roar that shook the building. I had never heard anything like it in my life. I guess I would describe it as a banshee scream mixed with the guttural sounds of something from The Exorcist. The crew that was waiting for us just started as we leaned against the wall painting and tried to regain some composure. The director took both of us aside and asked us what happened. We told him, and he immediately decided we were done filming for the day. The rest of my time there, I avoided the second floor like the plague. One of the sound guys was nice enough to go get my equipment, which he said was strewn all over the hallway. Filming concluded without another incident, but that feeling of uneasiness never really left me. That was 5 years ago, and to this day I still have dreams about that entity. In the dream, I'm standing alone in front of the massive building. I look up to the second floor, and it's there, looking out the window at me. Its neck bent and its arms twitching unnaturally. I hear that same roar. It's deafening and shakes the ground. I always wake up in a cold sweat, and it takes me a while to calm down. I'm still fascinated with the paranormal and even collect Ouija boards. This story is one that has always stuck with me, and to this day, still sends a chill down my spine. If you ever find yourself in Kentucky, you can tour Waverly Hills. However, I would advise steering clear of the second floor. My friend has told me this story a couple of times, and it's piqued my curiosity. If anyone has any idea of what it could have been, please let me know. From what I can recall, this was a couple of winters ago. A good friend of mine called Mike is a pretty avid hunter and spends a lot of hunting season in northern Wisconsin. On one particular winter day, he went out to hunt with some buddies in the woods around his cabin, which he was extremely familiar with, as his family makes frequent trips up there. He and his buddies had spent most of the day out in one area near the edge of their property, and as the sun began to set, Mike wanted to stay a little while longer, to see if he could get another shot or two in, so he stayed behind as the guys headed home. It had started to snow a lot that week, so following the tracks back would have been easy if it got too dark. After not much luck on his own, and with night falling quickly, he decided to make the trek back as well. The walk itself was roughly 20 minutes, so he was on his own for a while. Now the path they took was near the property line of another family's land, and as far as he knew, they weren't up there hunting that weekend. Even if they had been, it was pretty dark at that point, and most people were home by then. He's about halfway through his walk, and he noticed a shape in the trees a few yards across the property line. He described it as a solid, yet shadowy humanoid figure, well over 6 foot, like a huge muscular man who was built like a linebacker, but without any sort of hunting gear on, or noticeable weapon as far as he could tell. He didn't think anything of it at first, since he was probably just on his way back as well, so he continued on. A couple of minutes later, he heard the sound of something moving across the trees, a few yards past the property line, and about the same speed as he. He looked over and saw what looked to be the Shadow Man, walking almost parallel to him. At that point, he was a little bothered. Was this guy following him? Why? So he quickened his pace and made his way home without glancing back. The next morning, he and his buddies headed out there on the same route as they had taken yesterday. It hadn't snowed, so their footprints were still visible. As they followed the prints back, Mike became curious and took a detour over the property line to see where he last saw the figure walking. He didn't find a single footprint. I know there are some legends about things in northern Wisconsin, i.e. the Hodag in Rhinelander, but neither I nor Mike or any of our friends have any idea what this could have been. When my husband and I first married, we lived towns apart due to work. We also had a toddler. We decided to move in together as quickly as possible and went house hunting. I have always enjoyed stories of the supernatural or paranormal and joked about how much I would love a haunted house. I was later told by a clairvoyant that the universe delivers. We finally settled on a house that was within our price range. It was built in the 80s, so no concerns of lead paint nor historic value. Everything went smoothly for the most part. Our toddler would awaken in the middle of the night and explain that her stuffed animals would move or fly. We figured she just wanted to sleep with us. Moving was a big transition for such a youngster. We got pregnant with another kiddo quickly, and he went out of the country for about a year for work. Things were normal for the most part. The baby, 6 to 12 month age range, would sometimes stare at the front door and cry, or pump behind me while I was doing the dishes. Nothing too weird. My husband returned, and I eventually decided to remodel the house. It had not been updated since being built, and it was a major undertaking. My youngest was 2 at this point, with the oldest being 6. I became convinced that our house was haunted at this point, and continued to be convinced for 2 years. It is hard to remember the timeframes for everything, but I will describe the activities that occurred during this 2 to 3 year period. I had a dog who required medical attention twice a day. It would frequently go missing. I would find it later in the same spot I always kept it. One of my daughters would talk about the little boy who lived in the closet, and that she was afraid of him. So we moved the 2 girls into the same room, because we felt that they were lonely. This gave my husband a room to dedicate to his man cave and online PC gaming. My husband would speak of a shadow darting back and forth in the hallway. I had a dream that when we took down the sheetrock, we found a secret room with dead twins who warned us to get out. All of this stuff seemed like normal occurrences that happened in life. But then I finally became convinced that our house was haunted. My children and husband were all in bed. I had clean laundry waiting to be folded on the chase, but decided to sprawl it out on the couch and watch The Breakfast Club instead. Alone time was rare. All of a sudden, a shirt flew from the chase and hit me in the face. I ran to the bedroom, and my husband was asleep. I woke him up, and he voiced that he didn't believe me, but I know better because he got anxious and couldn't sleep. The next big event occurred when my youngest told me there was a man in her bathroom. We had a security alarm, so I knew it couldn't be true. I had her take me to the bathroom and show me. She described him as black and pointed, then stated, "He's right there. He's behind you." I told her we would just leave him alone and go about our day. We had other things happen that we just explained away. I woke up to a shadow figure hovering over my husband. My dogs would wake up in the middle of the night and bark at the foot of my bed. I would hear noises coming from the kids' rooms and get a terrible feeling when I would go check on them. I sometimes had to walk through a cold mist to get into their room. My dogs would also sometimes bark into the hallway. I finally called someone to intervene when my husband met me at our door freaking out. I worked weekends and would always come home and tell him about my day while he played on his computer. The kids would be in bed by this time, and I would then go shower and go to sleep. This night, my husband said I had already been home and talked to him about my day. I then said I was going to shower, So when he heard the garage door open and the car pull in, he immediately panicked. I was frightened to hear this as well. An entity taking my identity made me feel helpless. A co-worker got me in contact with her friend with special abilities. Her friend came over with another medium. They smudged our home and put quartz crystals in the corner. It was all free. They told me the limestone behind us held an energy which attracts transient spirits and entities. Some are good, some are not. The Shadow Man stayed because of my husband's PTSD and was attracted to the negativity. They also said domestic abuse had previously occurred in the man cave at some point, and that was a big focus of negative energy. They taught me to smudge and told me I have ancestors by my side keeping me safe. Things would still happen on occasions after this. We spoke to our Muslim friends about it, and they thought it sounded like a jinn. These creatures are mischievous and can be good or bad. They gave us a religious artifact from their hometown that had a prayer in Arabic carved into it. We kept it on our mantle and never had any trouble after that. They would always laugh at Christmas time when we had our Christmas mantle decoration and our Muslim artifact. We have since moved, but did spend a decade in that home. This last week, I had been vacationing in New Orleans with my husband and his family, and on the last night we were there, I got this painting of Lafty's bar. It's like a print on a huge piece of tile. Anyway, we got back into town and I had the picture in the living room on the first night. The second night I unwrapped it and left it on top of my dresser on the side of my bed. That night, I got sleep paralysis. I've never experienced this before. My immediate thought was that it was something to do with this picture. I can't remember the name of the shop, but I know it was right across from the original Café Domond. My dream was terrifying and full of monsters. And then I was waking up, and I remember the feeling of something holding me down as I was trying to wake and cry for help from my husband. On my way out to work that morning, I picked the painting up and left it outside in the bench because I didn't want it in the house. So that brings me to last night. When I woke up for work at 4:30, I noticed I had a security camera notification for a few hours ago and checked it to be sure no one was out there, since it was dark and I needed to let my dog out. I checked it and saw nothing, so went on with my morning. When I got to work, I checked my camera again and turned the brightness up, and saw a black shadow that seemed to smoothly glide across the screen. For all I know, it might have just been a bug, but the way it moved was too perfect, not jerking around like a fly or anything, which makes me wonder if it's something more. Because it starts on the left of the screen and goes directly to the area I placed it on the bench, which is on the very right. I'm asking here because I'm sure there are other people educated in this subject. I don't want to invite anything into my house and wanted to see what you all have to think. Your comments would very much be appreciated. I've got a few stories to share. My parents told me this. So this is between 2011 to 2014. We were sleeping at my dad's uncle's and aunt's house. I was between 8 to 11. I was sleeping with my parents, and all of a sudden my mum wakes up. It was the summer, and where I lived, it got really hot at times. So we had this AC-like thing, but it was a giant square portable box. Anyway, my mum looks over and sees this skinny/bony head looking over the cooler box. At first, she assumed it was my dad's aunt, who was quite old, since it was a netted door. She wakes Dad up to go see what it was, Dad looks over. He sees it too. He grabs his gun, rushes over, and poof, the thing was gone. This other story is from my cousin back in Norway in the 2000s. She wakes up in the dead of night with the moonlight shining through the window. She slept with her 2 sisters at the time. She stares up at the ceiling, and then she sees a shadowy figure float down through the ceiling and onto her. That was all she had remembered before she woke up. I have been having some paranormal experiences lately. For some background, I personally feel that I'm an empath, based off past paranormal experiences, steady development of intuition, and being heavily influenced by others' emotions as well as my own. From a young age of around 6, which is as far back as I can remember, I've had some steady experiences. My family used to live in a trailer that was haunted. Even though I had never experienced it, my parents told me many stories of unexplainable experiences they had while in that house. One event in particular which happened almost every single night. They said around midnight or so, you would hear loud running footsteps up and down the hallway towards my bedroom, through the kitchen and through the living room. At first, they thought it was me and my brother who'd gotten out of bed to roughhouse, but they'd come to check on us, and we would be sound asleep. I was about 6 to 7 at the time of my first experience with a spirit, and I remember it vividly. I was laying in bed one night in my room at around 10 p.m. Everyone else in the house was asleep, and we had no animals whatsoever. My child's mind was still active, and I was just laying in bed daydreaming about stupid little things because I couldn't sleep. I started to get a little tired after a while, so I turned over on my side where I was facing the wall. I closed my eyes and settled in when I heard a loud, heavy footstep slowly coming down the hall to my bedroom. I knew I wasn't asleep because everything was so real and not that wavy dream state. Another thing to note was that these footsteps weren't to be confused with what my parents had experienced. These sounded like men's work boots walking down the hardwood floor and then becoming softer when the presence stepped onto the carpet of my room. When I heard the steps soften on the carpet, I began crying softly, and I'd also broken out in a cold sweat, as well as trembling with all the hairs on my body standing on end. I remember down to a T that it felt like the room was filled with static electricity when the spirit entered the threshold. The figure stopped at my bed, and I could sense it looming over me. I looked at the blank wall I was facing at the time, expecting to see a shadow of the presence due to the heavy moonlight coming through my window. But there was no shadow. It was a gentle touch, but also heavy enough that I felt it fully on my skin, through a thick comforter and sheets. I heard a faint whisper of a man's voice that was indistinct, but then the hand lifted, and the footsteps began again. However, this time they departed. I heard them softly on the carpet, heavier on the hard floors, and then it didn't stop. A door didn't open, but the footsteps just faded out. I stayed frozen, crying and shaking for what felt like an eternity afterwards. I eventually remember turning around, seeing no one was there. Running to my parents' room at the other end of the house, with my eyes closed, and then I blacked out. My mum told me in the morning that all I said was, "Mummy, my angel visited me." She replied, "Your angel?" "Yeah, my guardian angel from heaven." And then I went back to my room and went to sleep. That was the first experience I can remember. I can recall that I was scared in the moment, because I didn't know what was happening. But I can say firmly that this presence was kind, and I almost felt like it was trying to tell me something. It meant me no harm, almost as if it were trying to protect me, like a guardian angel. Fast forward to now. My family and I relocated to another house in the city of Muscle Shoals. As of early 2015, we've been here about 4 years now. We had to work on the house before we could move in. My parents had made a deal with the landlord that we'd finish cosmetics on the house and he would waive about 3 to 4 months rent. So I spent a lot of time in the house even prior to living in it. As soon as I walked into the house for the very first time, it felt stuffy, almost like you can't breathe easily in its atmosphere. It was uncomfortable, at least to me. My parents didn't feel anything wrong or even remotely off about the place, which made me feel crazy at first. As days and weeks went by, I became a little more accustomed to the atmosphere, just trying not to pay attention to the uneasiness it caused me. There was one room in particular, which is now my brother's room, because I refused to live in there. I walked in there for the first time, this being around 2 in the afternoon in broad daylight. All my hair stood on end and I immediately felt faint. I had to turn and walk right back out into the hallway. And to this day, I haven't spent more than a few minutes at a time in that room, because any longer, and I begin to feel nauseated. So after we officially moved in and settled, it was perhaps late March/early April in 2015. Not a whole lot other than uneasiness had happened in the house, not to me at least. My younger brother, however, began seeing what he described as shadow people, to which many people are familiar with the term. This may be off topic, I'm not sure, but my brother also suffered from night terrors as well, just in case that may be important with his experience. Around the summer of 2015, my brother saw a shadow person in his doorway while he was laying down one night. He estimated between 9 and 11. He described it being as tall as one of our cousins, who was around 6'7", very skinny and elongated. He said he was unable to see through it, and it had no detail to it. It was just a black void of darkness in the shape of a human. He said he became scared and turned over to face his wall, when out of the wall came the Greek sad drama mask and manifested before his eyes. He said he shut his eyes, and it and the figure were gone when he opened them. About a month later, he had a night terror where he dreamt of an undescribable creature, in which he couldn't even fabricate an image in his mind because it was so unspeakably bizarre. However, minutes after he woke up, he could still see the image of the creature on whatever surface he looked at, which is something he had never experienced before. He also had a night terror a few nights ago, where he woke up my parents and myself out of a dead sleep. When my parents went into his room, they found him sitting up straight in his bed screaming his lungs out, but he was asleep the whole time. The next morning they questioned him about it, and he said he didn't remember a thing. The last thing he told me was about a nightmare he had in the fall of 2018, where he woke up from it and his television, which he keeps on all night for white noise, it was turned off. There's no way to turn off our TVs without someone manually hitting the off button, as there's no remote. He said that he noticed the uneasiness in the past few weeks, but hasn't had any more noticeable experiences. A year or so has passed, so it's probably late 2016/early 17, and I began having this weird experience that I've never had a problem with before. I developed a huge fear of the dark, which is extremely bizarre to me because even as a strong-willed child, I was never afraid of the dark at all. I slept with a nightlight as a toddler, but really only because my mum turned it on every night, not because I was afraid. So at this point, I'm 16 to 17, and now I'm scared of the dark. Here's the kicker. I'm only afraid when I'm in my house at night. I can go to a friend's house and sleep over, or even outside my house at night, and I wouldn't bat an eye. But as soon as I step foot in my pitch-black house, I tense up, become defensive, paranoid, and my hair stands on end, and I begin to tremble. Around when this first started happening, it wasn't happening a lot, to where it became a real issue for me. It was only that uneasy feeling, but it became accompanied with a feeling of being watched too. Since then I've learnt to live with it, and just accept that the feeling won't go away. Another thing I nearly forgot. After first touring the house and working on it for about a week or so, I went to my landlord's wife, who happened to go to the same church as my family, and asked if anything troubling had happened in the house that she knows of. She avoided the question, and then mocked me for being superstitious, before telling me I'm not allowed to answer that question, and walked away. Now, in present-day 2019, about 2 weeks ago, the activity that I've been experiencing for years has notably progressed. My dog, who practically lives in my room, has been staring and barking at one specific corner in my bedroom, and she just recently started doing it regularly within the last 2 weeks to a month. The barking sessions will last anywhere between a few minutes to hours. This immediately raised questions for me, and I kept an eye on her about it. She'll do it maybe once every other day now, but I feel like it's still worth noting. The terror I feel when I have to get up to pee at any time after 10 PM when the house is dark and quiet has brought me to tears for the first time ever. I'd gotten up from bed at around midnight one night about 2 weeks ago, right after Valentine's Day, and when I shut off the bathroom light and started walking back down the hall to my room, I had this sudden urge to run to my room instead. I felt wholeheartedly like something was chasing me down the hallway. So I did what my instincts told me to do. I ran down the hall and slammed the door shut, in what felt like the nick of time, because any second later, I felt like that presence would get me for sure. For whatever reason, I felt compelled to stand there silent and listen behind my door, and I heard faint footsteps for the first time in the house departing from my doorway. After that, I just curled up in my bed and cried myself to sleep because I was so terrified, unlike the spirit angel I encountered as a child. This presence felt aggressive and definitely one to avoid. So on Monday, I was lying in bed doing schoolwork with no one else in the house, and my 2 dogs were napping, so no one was making noise. I had my TV on, and this was in the middle of the day around noon. All of a sudden I heard footsteps. Not in my house though. This time they were on the roof. Not in the attic. The roof. The first time I heard it, I paused my TV set and started to listen. It did it again, and my dog went to the corner where the steps were concentrating on, and at the same corner as before, and started going nuts. I got up, ran outside in order to debunk any animals, or even unlikely workers that my parents had ordered to come. But alas, there was nothing. I surveyed my entire yard, front and back, examined all the perimeters of the house outside, and then went back inside and checked the dogs, all the rooms, and nooks and crannies. I couldn't find anything, and it couldn't be heard anywhere except my own room. I lay back down in my bed after calming down the dog and listened. I heard it again. I pulled out my phone to record it this time and successfully caught one more series of footsteps before it ceased completely. Now, up to this day, I've been having extreme paranoia, which is out of my character. I also keep seeing quick darts of shadows out of the corner of my eye, day and night. I don't know if this is just coming with being paranoid or if this entity is taunting me. I constantly feel watched, and the footsteps on the roof have happened once more since the first time. My parents have called me crazy, as they haven't experienced anything in this house, so I almost feel as though the presences have only been showing their rowdy behavior to me, as my brother hasn't seen any more shadow people in about 2 years. As I'm writing this, me and my brothers and I had another experience, and I was trying to get his experience accounted for in this text. It happened at about 9:16, so 10 minutes ago. I was writing his experience down as he was telling me about it, and when we were finished he stood up and walked to the doorway, where he stopped to say something else. But before he could, a loose DVD that was on my bookshelf away from the edge flew off the shelf, hit my dresser with a lot of force, and rolled around before landing face down. My brother and I both froze, looked over at each other before looking at the disc, and I asked him to flip over the DVD that happened to be thrown across the room, curious to see what it was. He turned it over, and it was the 4th and 5th movie of the Source series. Of course, by this point we darted out of my room, and I'm now camped out in our family room. If you're still here after listening to this, thank you. I'd love to know if anyone else has experienced anything like this, as any insight or advice would be tremendously appreciated. It was our last week in middle school. It was hot outside. My friend and I, 2 giggling fangirls, were hanging out by the bleachers near the softball field. Her back was to the forest behind the field, so I could see the leaves and branches swaying with the wind. Suddenly, in the middle of our conversation, time stopped. The trees behind my friend stood still. A weird black and white blur passed behind my friend. It was about her height. The moment passed quickly. It couldn't have lasted more than 2 seconds. We completely freaked out. She had seen the same blur behind me, but hers was brown and beige. Time had also stopped for her. Our recess wasn't fun after that. We were spooked and couldn't explain what we had seen. It's been 11 years. Although we're not friends anymore, I remember her dismissing what happened like it was nothing. I've told this story to my family, but they all seemed reluctant to believe me. Hell, I had trouble believing in the paranormal stories that my aunt had shared with me before I'd even shared mine. Whatever happened hasn't happened again. But I'm curious to know what it was, if anyone knows anything I don't. My grandparents' house had something evil in it. My grandpa went from being a non-believer to calling the Catholic Church and asking for a home blessing. The back room felt the darkest. I would wake up to see a black shadow standing in my closet. I started sleepwalking. I would have nightmares about walking into the living room and seeing the black figure. The other people in the family saw it too. One day I was home alone, finishing up a project before my mum could come and pick me up. I had this horrible feeling, so I called her and told her to hurry up and get me. That's when I heard footsteps walking up to my door, and someone call my name. I knew I was 100% home alone, because my dad and brother were out of town. Then, the shower turned on, and I called my mum crying. I practically ran out the house, but not before seeing the black figure standing in the master bedroom. As we were pulling out the driveway, my mum asked what it was. I turned around and saw it standing at the gates. It made it even scarier for me because she was seeing what I was seeing. On the car ride to her house, she told me about some of her experiences there. She broke her hip and was bedridden for a few months, and said it was awful being there alone. She would wake up and see the black figures hovering over her. She would hear voices calling out my brother and I's name, and would find bruises on her arms after nightmares. My grandparents still own the home, but I haven't lived there in years. We go over there for holidays, and I never stay long. I don't want to. It was in October of 2011. I was in my early 20s, and I was working retail at a big box store, which has since gone out of business. That night, the store had just closed, and it was about 9:02 p.m. Half of the overhead lights had just turned off in the store. If you've ever been inside of a closed retail store, every other row of lights turn off, so that it darkens a little bit, but you still have no problem seeing anything. I was fixing a camera display, waiting for the all-clear signal to count my registers, when off in my peripheral vision, I saw someone dark walking down the main aisle to my left. In the moment, I thought nothing of it, because my manager had dark skin, and the figure was walking from the direction of the back office. It got closer and closer, and then it made a sudden left-hand turn, really quickly, and suddenly down the last toy aisle away from me, which was the path to the electronics stockroom. The movement is what was really strange about it. Very smooth, as if it was gliding or floating along. And the turn itself was very fast, with no change in speed. Instead of what a normal person would do, which would be more of a rounded turn, cutting corners. It always kept in the perfect center of the aisle, as it traveled. I couldn't make out any details other than it was very dark and resembled a human in overall shape, slightly slender and average height for an adult. I couldn't tell you whether or not it was wearing any clothing, only that it was solid black from top to bottom, just like a shadow. There was a motion-activated baby doll toy that was about 5 to 10 feet in the toy aisle. One of those dolls that laughs or cries when it detects someone in front of it on a shelf. This thing had been sitting in that general area for months, and I was very familiar with it. It used to annoy the hell out of me when anyone would go down that aisle. It would go off, laughing or crying. If I had to grab a TV from the stockroom, I would set it off as I walked by in either direction. It became part of my life inside of that store, because nobody bought it. We had very little customers, hence why this store is no longer in business. Anyway, as this figure walked in front of it, the doll went off and started laughing. I immediately turned my head to see who it was, and nobody was there. I wasn't just hearing things, because I turned my head fast enough to where I saw the doll was sitting on the shelf, moving its arms and head, before coming to a halt a moment later. When no one was there, I took about 2 steps backwards so that I could see the entire aisle from end to end, and still nobody. From the time the baby doll was set off, to the time I stepped back to see the entire aisle was empty, was only a few seconds. There was no way that anyone could have made it to the other end of that aisle that fast, while making absolutely no noise. At this time, I felt no fear, only a sense of curiosity. In fact, seeing this gave me no sense of fear at all, just wonder and slight amazement at what I had probably just witnessed. It seemed to be walking to the electronics stockroom, which was in the very far corner of the store at the end of the toy aisle. Inside was just wall-to-wall concrete, with only one way in and one way out. Only managers had the key to open it, and nobody but approximately 3 people in the entire store had access to it on that particular night. I recall closing a couple of registers that night as normal, but my mind being elsewhere, wondered what it was that I had seen. After closing, they would release all of the employees out of the door at the same time. Everyone was by the front door waiting to be let out, and I had mentioned what I saw to some cashiers, and also the guy who worked in the back receiving area. The cashier girls were freaked out, but the guys who worked back in the receiving area didn't act shocked at all. One of them told me that they heard footsteps all the time back there, up in this giant wooden loft when no one was up there. Another of the guys told me they saw a figure once that was wearing old western or cowboy clothes. I put the incident into the back of my mind for several years and didn't think much of it. I'm not sure if this has any relation to the story at all, but I think it might be worth mentioning. At the time I was living with my uncle-in-law, who was my aunt's ex-husband. One day in November, less than a month later, I was waiting to be let out of the store at night, along with the other employees. My cousin called me on my cell and told me his dad had died. He had gone in for an emergency hernia operation while I was at work, and the surgeon had made a mistake and accidentally killed him. It makes me wonder if what I saw the month before had any relation to his death. An omen, perhaps? I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in the paranormal. I do know that there are things in this world that don't have a clear explanation, though. When I was young, around 8 or 9, I saw a black shadow person watching me in the middle of the night. The only noticeable feature being he looked to be wearing a suit. I say he because that's just what I instantly recognized the figure as. Flash forward to me being 22 and a new mum. I'm staying with my dad for the weekend in a totally different room from my significant other. He mentions he woke up in the night to see a figure watching my newborn daughter. I asked if it was a shadow figure, and he says yes, then mentions the fact he believed it was wearing a suit. I could always blow off the original experience, but to have someone else view the same figure doing similar things and wearing the same attire, not as easy. I like to think it's a late relative watching over us. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. Truly something chilling indeed. I myself have never seen a shadow person, but do hope to one day have the fortune of encountering something otherworldly. If anyone has experienced anything like this, or has a story to share that perhaps isn't remotely related but still terrifying in its own right, feel free to send it to my email or post it to my Reddit. If you enjoyed tonight's video, please don't forget to leave a like, drop a comment with your thoughts, as it's always very much appreciated. And if you're new and have gotten to the end of these ramblings, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for good measure. But for now, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.